Today we are going to look at a little bit more complex Excel functions, namely your if function, which can be used as a nested if function, and then later on in the video we're going to look at the VLOOKUP and also how to combine your nested if function with a VLOOKUP, because this is quite crucial when it comes to exams. This is quite a hot topic where because either a nested if is asked or a VLOOKUP function is asked, and they can also ask you to combine functions. So that's why I want to do combinations with you as well today. Alright, when it comes to a question, you must always first read it thoroughly, especially when it comes to the more complex functions, your higher order questions. They're not going to ask you straightforward what function to use, and also they're not going to tell you your criteria straight up. So you must first read your question thoroughly. So let's read the question. During the CAT period, the teacher gave his learners a class test and told them that for this test a pass will be from 50% and up. Help him in order to calculate by means of a function who pass and who fail. Alright, then on the left hand side we will have our variable, that's the mark the student got. Then the identified criteria will be numbers 50 and above is equal to a pass. Otherwise they will fail. So the function we will use is just a basic if function. If bracket A4 is larger than or equal to 50, because remember 50 is also a pass, as the question says 50% and up. So you cannot just say larger than 50, then it will not work. Okay, followed by a comma. Then your criteria, if it's true, if it's larger or equal to 50, what must happen? It must write pass. Otherwise, if it's false, it must write the word fail. So now we can check by changing the variable. Just have a look at the result, how it changes. So as I change the variable, it must equal to pass if I make it anything larger than 50, but if I make it smaller than 50, then it must be equal to fail. Then you know your function is done correctly. So that's a way you can test whether your if function, even a nested if function, works correctly by changing the variable. But please remember, change it back to the default value. Otherwise your examiner will think your function has been done wrong. Alright, then the next one, we're going to do the nested if function. So the scenario reads, during that same test, he said, meaning the teacher, that if they get above 80%, it will be considered a distinction. Help him in order to see who failed, who passed, and who got a distinction for this test. So now we are dealing with three criteria. We cannot use a basic if because there's an extra criteria involved. So our variable will still stick to 45. Then, so numbers 50 and above is a pass. Numbers 80% and above is a distinction now. Otherwise they will fail. So we cannot use a basic if. So the nested if will go as follows. If A13 is smaller than 50%, they will fail. Otherwise, if that's not the case, then we go into the next if function. So if A13 is smaller than 80%, then they will pass. Just a regular pass. Otherwise, if it's not smaller than 50 and it's not smaller than 80, then it means it must be above 80. That means they get a distinction. So just like the previous one, I'm going to change the variable just so that you can see the difference in the result. So let's say 51%, that's a pass. 79%, we still have a pass, but once we get to 80%, a distinction. Then you just put it back to the default value that you found it. And also one thing to remember with a nested if is that if there's three criteria, you will use two ifs. If there's 4 criteria, you will use 3 ifs. There will always be one less if than the amount of criteria that you have. So in the exam, let's say you get 8 criteria, you will have 7 ifs nested within each other. So that's always a valuable thing to remember, because the last criteria is always, if the other ones doesn't comply, then obviously it must be the last one. That's why you only use one less if than your amount of criteria. Right, moving on to VLOOKUP. Now, VLOOKUP is also a higher order function, usually found in question 4. So I know this has been done in term 1, so I'm going to explain a little bit less on what a VLOOKUP does and more on how the function itself works. Alright, so let's read the scenario. You are employed at an IT shop and your boss asks you to use the supplied item code and return the item name for him. Luckily you know the function to do so. Use this function in order to complete your task. Okay, now your variable will be the item code, which can also be found in your table there on the right hand side. So what you need to do, you need to match this item code in A6 with the item code in H6, and then it must return your what it is in your results. Okay, so the function goes always equal VLOOKUP A6, meaning I want to look for the variable in A6, followed by your table array. Which table must it must it match that string with? In other words, that will be this table there from H6 to I9. Okay, pardon, my things are just written wrong. That H should just be I, and the F should be H. But in any case, there at the top, there's the correct function for you in case you want to see the correct function used. So let's look at the one then at the top. Equal VLOOKUP A6, comma, H6 to I9, comma, 2, because we wanted to return the second column from the table array, and then we use false because we want to have it to be an exact match, not an estimated match. Otherwise, if you leave it out or you write true, it's going to look for an approximate match, and sometimes there are item codes that are close enough, and then it will return the wrong item value for you. So it's always good just to add false at the end for you. And also mind that I put my $signs, that is for absolute cell referencing. If you do not do that and you copy your function down, you use autofill to copy it down, then you're not going to get the correct results. So always remember to use absolute cell referencing when it comes to your VLOOKUP. Next up, let's look at the nested if function combined with your VLOOKUP. So again, you're employed in an IT shop and your boss asks you to use the supplied item code and return the item name for him. Now there's added criteria to this function. Only if the item costs more than 1,000 and there is more than 100 in stock. So you cannot just use a basic VLOOKUP, it's not going to work since the criteria is there. So we've got your code, you've got your price, you've got your stock. Now, in order for this to work, you first need to calculate your criteria. Meaning, so if B16 is smaller than 1,000, it must do nothing. It must return a blank, or it must just write a blank for you. That's why I did the quotation mark space quotation mark. Then you test for your second criteria. If C16 is smaller than or equal to 100, because remember it must be more than 100. 100 is not included. Then it must also return a blank for you. Now, if it's not smaller than or equal to 1,000 and it's not smaller than or equal to 100, meaning the stock there, then obviously it must comply to all your criteria there set at your scenario. So then you can run your VLOOKUP. So your VLOOKUP then kicks in. VLOOKUP brackets A16, again comma, then your table array. Remember what I said about absolute cell referencing, comma 2, again second column, comma false. That's why you'll see my results there. My others are blank because they do not comply to the criteria set in the scenario. If you look at the first one, yes, the price is more than 1,000, but the stock is lower than 100. So it must return blank. The second one, the stock is more than 100, but the price is too low to comply. So it's a blank. Whereas the third one reads printer because the price is higher than 1,000 and the stock is more than 100 Rand. So it must return printer. And the last one, your price is too low and your stock is too low. So obviously it's going to leave a blank. Alright, so if there's any complications during understanding your work, feel free to pause the video where you feel you need more attention and look at the functions that I used and try and practice them as much as possible, because it is nearly a given that you will always have an if or a VLOOKUP in your exams. So it's highly important that you focus on these functions. Even though it's last term's work, they do return in your exams and you will see them either now or September or in your end exam. So I wish you all good luck, and I hope all of you are studying, and also I hope you all are keeping healthy, and I'll see you during our next video. Bye bye.